Is the Timney Calvin Elite the best trigger for your Ruger 1022? Let's find out. I'm John McQuay with 8541 Tactical, and this is our review of the Timney Calvin Elite trigger for the Ruger 1022 system. Now, Timney has been making triggers for a very long time, and they have quite a few options out there for a variety of different shooting platforms. The Calvin Elite triggers tend to be on their higher end and really more competition oriented. So that's one of the reasons that we really got interested in this trigger and wanted to take a look at it. Right now, it is installed in our Ruger 1022 that is set up for National Rifle League 22 competition. Now we've got it sitting here in a Macmillan stock. We've got a Green Mountain barrel on it, but the receiver and the bolt inside is still the factory Ruger 1022 components. So we're going to base our comments off of this trigger fitting in the factory components. Now it should still fit in aftermarket receivers, any of the aftermarket receivers that will accept the regular factory Ruger 1022 trigger pack. Now, Timney was nice enough when they designed the Calvin Elite 1022 trigger to make it really a drop-in component. So it comes in its own aluminum housing, it comes with an extended magazine release, and it is ready to go. So all you need to do is take out your one screw, punch out two pins, drop out the factory trigger assembly, install the Calvin Elite trigger assembly, two pins in, and then screw it right back into the stock. We're not really going to cover the installation or removal because it really is that simple. Now, one of the really cool features of the Calvin Elite 1022 trigger is the trigger shoes are adjustable for user preference. They include 4 different trigger shoes, and my favorite here is this red anodized flat trigger that's got a little hook on the bottom. It does come with their curved or V-shaped trigger shoe installed. They also have a regular flat trigger shoe that has no hook at the bottom, and they have a really cool biathlon style knurled round trigger shoe that also goes in. Now, where the adjustment comes in this trigger is that the trigger shoe can be adjusted forward or back, left to right, and up and down. So the standard, any of the color anodized trigger shoes can be adjusted for height up and down on this little rod that comes pre-installed. And you can also loosen up the little rod and slide it forward and back. Now, the problem that we encountered with this adjustment system is that because it all has to fit into the factory housing here, there is a limited amount of movement backwards before you bottom out on the bottom of the housing. So since we have this little rod and then we have this lug that attaches the trigger shoe onto the rod, if we slide it back too far, we do run into the housing and we have some issues there, or we just run out of space on the trigger hanger and we can't get the trigger fastened in there tightly again, and it may come off during use. So if you have really large hands or you're utilizing a system where you have an AR pistol grip directly behind the trigger well, then that can be a really nice option because you can move that trigger quite a bit further forward than it is in the factory position. Now, we are using the Macmillan A522 stock here, which puts the pistol grip in the same position as you do on a regular Macmillan A5, and that gives you a little bit more of a reach to the trigger. So if you have that trigger too far forward, then you have a really far reach to it, and you end up pushing your whole hand position forward and then floating the fingers of your firing side hand in order to support that trigger finger. Now, I mentioned that I really like the feel of the flat hooked trigger that they come with, but I actually have the knurled round trigger installed here because that one allows me to move the trigger closest to the rear of the trigger guard without running into any problems. So although I like the feel of the flat one, the round knurled one is probably the one that I'm going to continue to run for a little while on this trigger. Now, once we got the trigger installed and got it out to the range and did some shooting with it, we got it broken in, got a couple of magazines, probably a brick or two of ammunition through it, and we noticed that the trigger pull seemed to be on the heavy side. Now, this trigger comes advertised at 1.5 to 2 pounds adjusted from the factory, and that's the key thing, is it's adjusted from the factory. The only adjustable portion in this is the trigger shoes and how you put them on. You cannot adjust the pull weight. And when we talked to Timney about it, they said they've had problems in the past with making adjustable trigger systems for semi-automatic rifles, where they get out of adjustment and then you start to have some serious problems. I understand that, so they adjust it somewhere between 1.5 and 2 pounds from the factory. That's what it's advertised as. That's what it's supposed to ship at. Our trigger was considerably heavier, up in that 2.5 pound range or so. So, of course, we contacted Timney. I spoke with Calvin and asked him exactly how we could adjust the trigger or what we could do to be able to bring that pull weight back down. And the only answer I got was we had to ship the trigger back to them and have them evaluate it. So we did that. We pulled the trigger out, sent it back to them. They looked at it. The sheet that we got back with it said they cleaned it and adjusted it, and they got it back to us in a fairly timely manner. We reinstalled the trigger. Actually, prior to reinstalling the trigger, I put a Lyman digital trigger gauge on it and checked the trigger pull over 10 pulls, and we were at 2 pounds 3 ounces on the trigger pull. So we reinstalled it, went ahead and shot some rounds through it, and then again checked the trigger pull, and we were still at that 2 pounds 3 ounces. So still above the 2 pound advertised window. I really would have preferred it to be down in that 1.5 to 2 pound range. This is not all bad though, because the trigger is very, very crisp. There is no perceivable take-up. No perceivable creep. You apply pressure, apply pressure, apply pressure, and then the trigger breaks. And you have a little bit of over travel after the trigger breaks, the bolt cycles, and then you have the same amount on that trigger reset. So the same amount as you had on over travel, you have on the trigger reset. And then once you get that click for that reset, the trigger is ready to go again. There is no movement, no creep until you reach that break weight. So Timney did a very good job on the quality of the trigger pull. It's very clean. It feels very nice. And again, being able to set this up to get the trigger shoe exactly where you want is a very nice thing overall. I just really wish that they had come down a little bit better on the weight. Now, this trigger runs in the $250 range. I believe it's $269 on Timney's website. We found them at various different companies like Brownells that are running a little bit cheaper on it. So this is what we would consider a high-end trigger for the Ruger 1022. This is set in the same price range to compete with the kid triggers, which those are what we are seeing the most of at NRL 22 competitions. Now, it is a little bit more expensive than Kid single stage. It is a little bit less expensive than the Kid 2 stage. So it is right in that arena. Now, the kid triggers, of course, do not have the ability to change out the trigger shoes. So if that is something that is very important to you and a 2 pound trigger pull is what you are looking for in the Timney Calvin Elite trigger, then this may be a great option. If you want a lower trigger pull into that 1.5 or lower, you're going to need to go to a different trigger. We're going to assume that our trigger is pretty standard because, again, we shipped it off, they checked it, we sent it back, and we checked the trigger pull before we ever actually installed it in the rifle. So I don't think it's an equipment issue or an issue with this receiver or this bolt. So keep that in mind when you're shopping for a trigger. Now, again, this is the only trigger I'm aware of for the 1022 that does have the ability to change out the trigger shoes. They do have some really nice extras, like they included this really cool little tool that is the perfect size Torx bit to adjust the triggers and get them installed. And it also has this little nub on the back side of it. This is the perfect size to push out the pins on your receiver to swap things in. And the trigger housing is very well machined. It's very well finished. And when we put it into our 1022 stock here, it actually fit a little bit tighter than the factory components. So you may gain a little bit of accuracy when everything fits in. Now, if you do have a stock or a chassis that has been bedded for your current trigger group, you may have to grind some of that out and rebed it when you install the Timney trigger. But if you're running with a factory setup or a factory inlet like we are on this Macmillan here, we were able to drop it in. We got a really good snug fit and everything bolted back up just fine. We did not see any accuracy loss with the Timney trigger, but when we compared it with the Kia drop-in components that I had in there, those were running at 2 pounds 10 ounces. The Timney is 2 pounds 3 ounces on this rifle. So we did get a little bit of a weight savings. So these components will stay in the rifle for now, and we're going to run them long term. But just keep that in mind when you're shopping and when you're looking at the price point and when you're looking at your desired trigger pull. I can say that if you like the 2 pound range on the trigger, then this is a great trigger for NRL 22 competition. If you're a guy that wants a little bit lighter trigger, you're going to have to look elsewhere. I do want to thank Timney for sending the trigger out for us to review. If you guys want to see the full write-up, we'll leave a link down below to our website so that you can actually read a little bit more about the trigger, and you can check out places that you can get the trigger for a fairly reasonable price. If you guys have any questions or comments over anything we've covered on this video, please leave it in the comments section down below or send it to us on Facebook or Twitter. If you like the video, please make sure you like, share, and subscribe. And until next time, get out and shoot.